the outer rim colony of Harmony. 3 was a testament to humanity's resilience and ambition. A planet once barren and inhospitable had been transformed into a thriving hub of life, where children laughed in the streets and diplomats discussed treaties in glass-domed halls. Emma Carter, 8 years old and endlessly curious, darted between her parents, clutching a small stuffed bear she named Theodore. Her eyes sparkled as she gazed up at the towering figures of the Zaldra delegation, their angular features reflecting the sunlight. They were strange and imposing, but her innocent mind saw them as no more than tall, shiny beings from the stars. Her mother, Diana Carter, a renowned xenobiologist, gently squeezed her hand. "Stay close, Emma. These talks are important." Beside them, Mark Carter, Emma's father and a seasoned diplomat, kept a wary eye on the Zaldra representatives. The Zaldra were not known for their patience, and Mark had spent sleepless nights preparing for the summit. Harmony 3's future, and perhaps humanity's, hinged on these fragile negotiations. The Zaldra delegation, led by Ambassador Ralvek, stood in the center of the Grand Hall. Their shimmering, segmented armor and elongated skulls made them look more like predators than diplomats. Ralvek's voice was low and guttural as he addressed the assembly, his translator device smoothing the harsh sounds into clipped, precise English. "Cooperation with humanity is possible, but your kind must learn respect for the order of the galaxy." Emma, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, why do they look so angry?" Mark smiled down at her, though his eyes betrayed his tension. "They're not angry, sweetheart. They're just different." Ralvek's gaze shifted, sharp and unrelenting, landing on the small human child. "Different," he echoed, the translator lagging just enough to make his tone chilling. A human term for weakness. Before anyone could react, Emma, emboldened by curiosity, took a small step forward, clutching Theodore tightly. "My mommy says being different is good. It means you can learn from each other." A murmur rippled through the human delegation. Mark's heart froze. Diana's hand shot out, but it was too late. Ralvek's clawed hand lashed out, seizing Emma by the shoulder. The hall fell silent as the towering alien bent down, his unreadable eyes locking with hers. "Insolence," he hissed. With a swift, brutal motion, his claws tightened around Emma's fragile frame. A sickening crack echoed through the hall. Time seemed to stop. Diana's scream tore through the air, primal and raw, as Emma crumpled to the ground, Theodore tumbling from her grasp. Mark lunged forward, but guards held him back. The human delegation erupted in chaos. Diplomats shouting, soldiers drawing weapons. The Zaldra, unfazed, stood in cold, stoic silence. Ralvek straightened, addressing the stunned assembly. "Let this serve as a lesson. The Zaldra tolerate no disrespect." Without another word, he turned and marched out, his delegation following like shadows. For a moment, there was only silence, broken only by Diana's sobs as she cradled her daughter's lifeless body. Mark knelt beside them, his hands trembling, his mind racing. This was no mere tragedy. This was a declaration of war. The news reached Earth within hours. Images of Emma's broken body and Diana's anguished face flooded every screen, igniting a firestorm of outrage. Protests erupted in every major city, demanding retribution. The United Nations held an emergency session, but it was the United States that acted first. President Gabriel Mitchell addressed the world from the Oval Office, his expression grim but resolute. This act of barbarism will not go unanswered. The Zaldra have shown their true nature. They believe us weak, expendable. They are wrong. Humanity has faced extinction before, and each time we have risen stronger. Today, we declare war, not just for Emma Carter, but for every human who dares to dream of a future free from fear. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Nations set aside their differences, pooling resources and technology to form the United Earth Defense Fleet. Factories shifted to wartime production, churning out ships and weapons at a pace unseen since the Second World War. Volunteers flooded recruitment centers, their faces etched with determination. Among them were men and women who had never held a weapon, but now trained to fight an enemy far beyond Earth's skies. Captain Elizabeth Hayes stood in the bustling command center of the USS Resolute, her piercing blue eyes scanning the holographic display of the Zaldra fleet. She was a woman of sharp instincts and unorthodox strategies, a former fighter pilot who had earned her rank through sheer audacity. Her crew was a mix of seasoned veterans and raw recruits, each one eager to prove themselves in the fight ahead. This isn't just about revenge, Hayes told her officers during the first briefing. It's about survival. The Zaldra see us as lesser beings, but they've underestimated us. That's their first mistake, and it'll be their last. Dr. Marcus Boyd, a physicist from MIT, joined the effort with equal fervor. Known for his groundbreaking work on adaptive energy systems, Boyd had been tapped to lead the research division. He pored over every scrap of data on Zaldra technology, determined to find a weakness. If they think their tech makes them invincible, he muttered, they're in for a surprise. Meanwhile, Sergeant John Ramirez trained fresh recruits in guerrilla tactics, preparing them for the inevitable ground battles. The Zaldra fight like machines, he barked during drills. Rigid, predictable. We're going to teach them what it means to improvise. The first skirmishes were brutal. The Battle of Vega's Anvil saw humanity's fledgling fleet clash with a Zaldra patrol. Ships exploded in fiery bursts, scattering debris across the void. Hayes led the charge, piloting her ship through narrow asteroid fields to outmaneuver the enemy. Though the Zaldra's superior firepower inflicted heavy losses, the humans managed to retreat with critical intelligence, blueprints of Zaldra warships, and energy weapons. The loss of life was staggering, but the survivors returned not in despair, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Humanity had taken its first step into a war it could not afford to lose. As the fleet regrouped and scientists worked tirelessly to decipher the stolen data, a quiet determination settled over every soldier, scientist, and civilian. This was no longer just a fight for vengeance. It was a battle for humanity's place in the galaxy. And though the odds were stacked against them, one truth became clear. The Zaldra had awakened a force they could not comprehend. The stars above the orbital outposts burned cold and indifferent, a stark contrast to the fiery resolve of the humans working tirelessly within its reinforced walls. The Zaldra's act of brutality had galvanized Earth's collective will, turning grief into determination and outrage into action. Months after the death of Emma Carter, humanity was no longer the species the Zaldra had dismissed as weak and divided. They were focused, unified, and dangerous. Captain Elizabeth Hayes stood at the center of the command deck on the USS Resolute, her gaze fixed on the tactical display that floated in the air before her. The holograms showed the movements of the Zaldra fleet, their massive, angular ships forming an impenetrable blockade around their central stronghold in the Zarnak system. It was a fortress, a citadel of alien power, but to Hayes, it was a challenge, a puzzle waiting to be solved. "We've got one shot at this," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of the ship systems. "If we fail, they'll wipe out every colony we've got left. We won't get a second chance." Beside her, Dr. Marcus Boyd adjusted his glasses and studied the energy readings projected on the display. "The key is their shields," he said, his tone measured but intense. "They are powered by a self-sustaining energy loop. It's efficient, but it also means any disruption could cause a catastrophic overload." Hayes arched an eyebrow. "Catastrophic for them, or for us?" "For them," Boyd replied with a grim smile. "If we hit them with an EMP pulse calibrated to their energy signature, it'll take out their shields long enough for us to punch through." Lieutenant James Tex Morgan, the ship's weapons officer, leaned against the console, chewing on an unlit cigar. "And how exactly do we get close enough to deliver that pulse without them blowing us to bits?" "We don't," Hayes said, her expression unreadable. "We send a stealth team." Morgan straightened, his casual demeanor vanishing. "A suicide mission?" "A mission," Hayes corrected. "Nothing more." Sergeant John Ramirez entered the room, his tactical armor still scuffed from the last training exercise. He listened silently as Hayes outlined the plan, his jaw tightening with every word. When she finished, he nodded. "I'll lead the team." "Are you sure?" Hayes asked. "You'll have to get in and out without being detected. If you're caught—" "They'll wish they hadn't," Ramirez said, his voice like steel. "I've trained my squad for this. We'll get it done." The stealth ship, codenamed Phantom, launched from the Resolute under the cover of a meteor storm. Its hull was coated in a layer of adaptive camouflage, rendering it nearly invisible to Zaldra sensors. Inside, Ramirez and his team prepared for the mission with a solemn focus. Each member carried specialized gear, EMP charges, cloaking devices, and pulse rifles modified to penetrate Zaldra armor. Corporal Sarah Diaz, the team's tech specialist, checked the calibration on the EMP charges one last time. "These better work," she muttered, her fingers dancing over the controls. "They will." Boyd's voice crackled through the comms. "Just make sure you're in position before you activate them. The pulse will knock out your cloaks, too." "Good to know," Diaz replied dryly. Private Henry Jacobs, the youngest member of the squad, tightened the straps on his helmet. "First time going up against Zaldra up close," he said, his voice betraying a hint of nerves. "Any advice, Sarge?" "Yeah," Ramirez said, his eyes cold and steady. "Don't hesitate. They won't." The Phantom slipped through the blockade undetected, its thrusters firing in short, silent bursts to avoid drawing attention. As they approached the Zaldra command ship, the squad activated their cloaking devices and exited the airlock, floating through the void in formation. The vast, metallic hull of the alien vessel loomed before them, its surface covered in glowing runes and angular protrusions. Using magnetic grapples, the team latched onto the hull and began their ascent toward the shield generator. Ramirez led the way, his movements precise and deliberate. Every second felt like an eternity, the silence of space amplifying the tension. When they reached the generator, Diaz got to work, her tools cutting through the alien alloy with painstaking care. "Hurry it up, Diaz," Ramirez said, his eyes scanning the void for any sign of patrols. "Almost there," she replied, sweat beading on her forehead despite the chill of her suit's interior. "Just a little more." An alarm blared, shattering the silence. The runes on the hull lit up, pulsing with a warning glow. "They've spotted us," Jacob shouted. "Defensive positions." Ramirez barked, raising his rifle. Zaldra drones emerged from hidden compartments, their sleek forms bristling with weapons. The squad opened fire, their pulse rifles tearing through the drone's armor. The battle was chaotic, bursts of light and shrapnel filling the void. Despite the odds, the team held their ground, their training and determination turning the tide. "Diaz, now!" Ramirez yelled. Diaz finished placing the charges and activated the EMP. A blinding pulse of energy rippled out, disabling the drones and the Zaldra shields in one fell swoop. The squad barely had time to reattach their grapples as the Phantom swooped in to extract them. On the Resolute, Hayes watched as the holographic display showed the Zaldra shields collapsing. "Weapons free," she ordered. Morgan grinned as he unleashed a barrage of missiles and energy blasts. The Resolute and its fleet tore into the Zaldra ships, exploiting the momentary vulnerability. Explosions lit up the void. The once imposing blockade reduced to burning wreckage. As the squad returned to the Resolute, battered but alive, Ramirez stepped onto the command deck. "Mission accomplished," he said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. Hayes nodded. "Good work. But this is just the beginning. The Zaldra will retaliate." "They can try," Ramirez said, his gaze hard. "We'll be ready." The victory was a turning point, but the war was far from over. For every ship they destroyed, the Zaldra would send more. Yet humanity had proven something vital. They could adapt, innovate, and fight back against even the most advanced enemy. The Resolute set course for the next engagement, its crew more determined than ever to finish what had been started. The bridge of the USS Resolute thrummed with tension as the ship hurtled toward the Zarnak system's inner core. The remaining Zaldra forces had regrouped, retreating to the heart of their empire, where their most formidable weapon, an ancient planet killer known as the Sunbreaker, was stationed. Its purpose was clear: to obliterate Earth as retaliation for humanity's defiance. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. Captain Elizabeth Hayes stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the tactical display. The hologram showed the Sunbreaker's massive form, a leviathan bristling with weaponry and protected by an energy field so dense it made their earlier victory over the Zaldra fleet look trivial. Around her, the bridge crew worked in focused silence, each person acutely aware that the survival of their species rested on their next move. "Status report," Hayes said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Dr. Marcus Boyd, seated at the science console, turned to face her. "The Sunbreaker's energy shield is unlike anything we've encountered. It's drawing power directly from the system star, creating an inexhaustible defense. Conventional weapons won't even scratch it." Hayes frowned. "What about unconventional?" Boyd hesitated, his mind racing. "There's one possibility. If we can destabilize the star itself, it could disrupt the energy feed to the shield." "You're suggesting we collapse a star?" Lieutenant Tex Morgan said, incredulous. "That's not a plan. It's a death wish." "It's not ideal," Boyd admitted, "but it's the only shot we've got. If we don't stop the Sunbreaker, Earth is gone." Hayes turned to Sergeant John Ramirez, who had joined them on the bridge. His armor still bore the scars of their last mission, but his resolve was unshaken. "Can your team handle this?" Ramirez's expression was grim. "We'll handle it. Just tell us what we need to do." Boyd quickly outlined the plan. The team would take a modified shuttle equipped with a prototype destabilizer device, a weapon capable of triggering a chain reaction within the star. It was untested, volatile, and incredibly dangerous, but it was their only hope. The shuttle, codenamed Tempest, launched from the Resolute and descended into the Zarnak system's blazing inferno. Inside, Ramirez and his squad prepared for what would likely be their final mission. The atmosphere was tense but resolute, each member silently steeling themselves for the task ahead. Corporal Sarah Diaz checked the stabilizer's controls, her fingers trembling slightly. "This thing wasn't exactly built for a stress test in the middle of a star," she muttered. "It doesn't have to be perfect," Ramirez said, his voice steady. "It just has to work." Private Henry Jacobs, his youthful nerves now tempered by battle-hardened experience, gripped his rifle tightly. "If this goes sideways, I just want you all to know it's been an honor." Diaz smirked. "Don't get sentimental on me now, Jacobs. We've got a job to do." As the Tempest approached the star's outer corona, the heat and radiation began to strain the shuttle's shielding. Warning lights flashed, and the hull groaned under the immense pressure. Despite the risks, Ramirez guided the team with unwavering focus. "Diaz, deploy the stabilizer," he ordered as they reached the designated coordinates. Diaz activated the device, which extended from the shuttle's underside like a gleaming spear. It began to hum, drawing power from the star and redirecting it into a chaotic spiral of energy. The destabilization process had begun, but the Zaldra were not idle. A squadron of their sleek, deadly fighters emerged from the Sunbreaker, their weapons trained on the Tempest. Ramirez and Jacobs manned the shuttle's defensive turrets, firing back with precision. The battle was fierce, the shuttle shaking with every impact. "We can't hold them off forever," Jacobs shouted as another explosion rocked the vessel. "We don't have to," Ramirez said, his eyes locked on the countdown timer for the stabilizer. "Just a few more minutes." On the bridge of the Resolute, Hayes watched the chaos unfold on the main display. The Tempest was holding its position, but barely. Meanwhile, the Sunbreaker's shield continued to glow with an unyielding brilliance. "Captain, we've got incoming," Morgan reported. "A Zaldra dreadnought, closing fast." Hayes, clench your fists. "All ships, engage the dreadnought. By the Tempest as much time as you can, the Resolute's fleet moved into formation, their weapons lighting up the void. The battle was ferocious, each ship fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal. The Zaldra dreadnought unleashed devastating volleys, but the human fleet held its ground, their determination unshakable. "Come on, Ramirez," Hayes whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her console. "Come on." Inside the Tempest, the stabilizer's countdown reached its final seconds. The device emitted a piercing whine as it prepared to unleash its full power. "Detonation in 3-2. Diaz's voice wavered as the shuttle shook violently. 1. The stabilizer erupted in a blinding cascade of energy, its pulse driving deep into the star's core. For a moment, there was silence, a pregnant pause as the star itself seemed to shudder. Then it began to collapse. The Zaldra fighters broke off their attack, retreating toward the Sunbreaker as the star's energy spiraled out of control. The Tempest system screamed warnings as Ramirez piloted the shuttle away from the implosion. The team held on, the heat and radiation threatening to tear them apart. "We're not going to make it," Jacob shouted, his voice barely audible over the alarms. "Yes, we will," Ramirez barked. "Hold on." The Tempest burst free from the star's gravitational pull just as it detonated in a supernova. The shock wave raced outward, engulfing the Sunbreaker. The massive weapon's shield faltered, its energy feed severed, and the subsequent explosion ripped it apart. The Zaldra forces were obliterated, their fleet reduced to glowing debris. On the Resolute, the bridge crew erupted into cheers as the Sunbreaker vanished from the tactical display. Hayes allowed herself a brief moment of relief before turning her attention back to the Tempest signal. "Did they make it?" she asked, her voice tight. Boyd scanned the readings. There's a signal. They're alive." The Tempest, battered and scorched, limped back toward the fleet. When it docked, Ramirez and his team emerged, exhausted but victorious. Hayes met them in the hangar, her expression softening for the first time in days. "You did it," she said simply. Ramirez nodded, his face etched with weariness. "It's over." But even as the crew celebrated their hard-won victory, Hayes knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had shown the galaxy what they were capable of, but there would be more challenges ahead. As the Resolute set course for Earth, its crew carried with them the knowledge that they had faced the impossible and won.